There was a man who kept telling himself the same thing. I just need more discipline. Every time he failed to follow through, every time he stopped halfway, every time he went back to old habits, he blamed himself, tried harder, pushed more, promised he would change. But nothing lasted, and over time, he started to believe something worse. Maybe I'm just not that kind of person. And that belief stuck with him longer than any failure, until one day, he realized something that changed everything. It wasn't his discipline that was broken. It was the way he saw himself. Discipline is often praised as the answer to almost every problem. Want to exercise more? Use discipline. Want to eat healthier? Use discipline. Want to break a bad habit? Use discipline. The message sounds logical, and for many years, the man in this story believed it completely. Whenever he failed to follow through on a goal, he blamed a lack of discipline. Whenever a new routine collapsed after a few weeks, he blamed a lack of discipline. Whenever old habits returned, he blamed himself. The conclusion always sounded the same. I need to try harder. At first, this belief seemed motivating. It gave him a target, something to improve. But after years of repeating the same cycle, the belief became heavier, because every failure appeared to confirm something deeper. Not that the plan was wrong, not that the strategy needed adjustment, but that he was somehow flawed. One morning, he woke before sunrise. The bedroom was quiet. The curtains remained closed. Soft morning light waited outside. As he rested against the pillow, staring toward the ceiling, his thoughts followed a familiar path. Thinking, reflecting, reviewing another goal he had failed to maintain. A walking routine that lasted 3 weeks. A reading habit that lasted 1 month. An exercise program abandoned shortly after it began. Each attempt seemed to end the same way. Strong motivation, good intentions, temporary success, then gradual decline. The pattern frustrated him, not because he lacked goals, because he genuinely wanted to change. Yet every time change became difficult, an old belief quietly resurfaced. Maybe I'm just not disciplined. After more than 30 years caring for older adults, I've seen this belief countless times. People often assume behavior creates identity. But in reality, identity frequently shapes behavior first. The brain naturally seeks consistency, not with goals, not with dreams, with self-image. If a person repeatedly tells themselves, I am not organized, I am not healthy, I am not consistent, the mind begins protecting that story, not because it wants failure, because the brain prefers familiarity, even when familiarity is limiting. The man did not realize it yet, but he was fighting 2 battles, one against old habits, and another against an identity he had been reinforcing for years. The second battle was far more powerful, because every action eventually returns to the question, who do I believe I am? And until that question changes, lasting change remains difficult. The turning point came from a simple observation. The man began paying attention to areas of his life where discipline did not seem difficult. Surprisingly, there were quite a few. He never forgot to pay important bills. He rarely missed family commitments. When someone needed help, he showed up. When responsibilities appeared, he handled them. That raised an interesting question. If he truly lacked discipline, how could he remain consistent in so many other areas? The answer slowly became clear. The problem was not discipline. The problem was identity. In the areas where he remained consistent, his behavior matched the way he saw himself. He believed he was dependable. He believed he was responsible. He believed he was someone who could be counted on. Because those beliefs felt natural, the actions followed naturally. No constant motivation required. No endless self-discipline. No daily battle. Just alignment. One morning, while sunlight filled the kitchen and bright morning light reflected through the open curtains, he sat quietly with a cup of coffee, thinking, reflecting, looking back at years of failed attempts to change. And for the first time, he noticed something he had never seen before. Every goal he abandoned had been accompanied by a story about who he was. When he missed a workout, the story said, "See, you're not an exercise person." When he skipped a new habit, the story said, "See, you never stay consistent." When he failed once, the brain immediately transformed a temporary event into a permanent identity. That realization was uncomfortable, but it was also liberating. Because if identity had been created through repetition, perhaps it could also be changed through repetition. Instead of asking, "How do I become more disciplined?" he began asking, "What kind of person do I want to become?" The question felt different, more meaningful, more powerful, and slowly, his focus shifted from forcing behavior to building identity. Not through grand promises, through small evidence, one action at a time. Most people underestimate the power of identity. They focus on outcomes, weight loss, fitness, productivity, success. But identity operates beneath all of those goals. It quietly influences decisions every day. The man discovered this during one of his evening reflections. The night was calm. The bedroom dark, the house silent. As he rested against the pillow, staring into the darkness, he thought about the countless times he had tried to change. Each attempt followed a familiar pattern. Strong motivation at the beginning, excitement, momentum, then difficulty, then resistance, then eventually old habits returned. For years, he believed the problem was weak discipline. Now he saw something different. His actions had been fighting against his identity. Imagine trying to become healthier while secretly believing, "I've never been the healthy type," or trying to become organized while believing, "I'm naturally disorganized." The brain experiences conflict. Every action feels forced. Every decision requires effort, and effort alone rarely lasts forever. Eventually, people return to behaviors that feel familiar. Not because they want to fail, because familiarity feels safe. The brain prefers consistency with identity more than consistency with goals. This explains why lasting change often feels difficult. Many people focus entirely on behavior while ignoring belief. They try to build new habits without updating the story they tell themselves. As a result, a gap forms, a gap between action and identity. And maintaining that gap requires enormous energy. The man finally understood that lasting change would require more than new behaviors. It would require a new self-image, a new story, a new answer to the question, "Who am I becoming?" Once he understood that, everything began to look different. Because changing behavior suddenly seemed less important than changing belief. And belief, unlike motivation, could be reinforced every single day. The process of changing identity turned out to be much simpler than the man expected. Not easy, but simple. He stopped focusing on huge transformations. Instead, he focused on collecting evidence, small evidence, consistent evidence. One morning, he went for a short walk. Nothing impressive, just 10 minutes, a few hundred steps, some gentle movement, fresh air, sunlight on his face. In the past, he would have dismissed such a small effort. But now he viewed it differently. The walk wasn't proving he was fit. It was proving he was becoming someone who exercised. The distinction mattered. Every small action became a vote for a new identity. Reading one page, taking one walk, doing one healthy activity, keeping one promise to himself. Each action reinforced a new belief. The brain began collecting evidence, not evidence of perfection, evidence of consistency. Over time, this approach reduced resistance. The actions no longer felt like punishment. They felt like confirmation. Confirmation that change was already happening. Weeks passed, then months, and gradually, something interesting occurred. The habits became easier, not because the activities changed, because his identity changed. The person who once believed he lacked discipline now saw himself differently. Not perfect, not extraordinary, simply consistent. And consistency, repeated long enough, creates transformation. This is why lasting change rarely comes from dramatic effort. It comes from repeated evidence, small actions, performed often enough that the brain eventually accepts a new identity as truth. The belief that we lack discipline can be surprisingly damaging because it focuses attention on the wrong problem. The problem is often not effort, not motivation, not willpower. The problem is the story we continue telling ourselves. The man spent years trying harder, pushing harder, demanding more from himself. Yet nothing truly changed until he changed the way he viewed himself. Once that happened, behavior began following naturally. Not instantly, not perfectly, but steadily. And that steady progress mattered far more than short bursts of motivation. One evening, as darkness settled outside the bedroom window, he reflected on how different life felt compared to a few years earlier. The circumstances had not changed dramatically. He was still the same person, living in the same home, following many of the same routines, yet internally, something was different. He no longer defined himself by past failures. He no longer used old mistakes as evidence of permanent limitations. Instead, he focused on current actions, current choices, current evidence. And with every small promise he kept, his confidence grew. Not because he was becoming someone else, because he was becoming more intentional about who he already wanted to be. After more than 30 years caring for older adults, I believe one lesson appears again and again. People rarely change because they force themselves. They change because they begin seeing themselves differently. Because behavior follows belief. Identity shapes action, and actions reinforce identity. The cycle works both ways, which means the story you tell yourself today matters more than you think. So if there is one thing worth remembering, it is this: you may not need more discipline. You may simply need a new identity, one built through small actions, repeated consistently, until the person you hope to become finally feels like the person you already are.